While I was traveling in California, I came across a bumper sticker that said, "If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention." And I was surprised at how outraged I became at that bumper sticker, to the point that I was a little embarrassed. Like, I was ashamed of myself for, allowing such a severe emotional response. Why? Why did I get outraged? Because I think, and I have a proposition, you guys can tell me if I'm full of shit, but my proposition is that being triggered or offended is not only offensive in itself, but I could go as far as to say that it is a form of violence, emotional violence. And this is not a new thought, and I'm sure a lot of you have thought this very same thing, even if you are living in a place where you can't come out and say it without being lynched. But let me explain this in more detail. So when I'm exposed to anger or offense or upset in that way, it makes me feel bad in here. I like positivity and gratitude. Those make me feel good in here, right? So not like ideologically do they make me feel bad, but just plain bad, like being sick or injured or something like that. By attempting to get others involved by making them feel those things as well, like if you are enraged or triggered and then you send out an enraged tweet and trying to get other people to get enraged with you, I propose that by doing that, we are inflicting violence upon our friends and the rest of the world in general. These days, people are becoming offended or triggered by the silliest things. An inanimate object, such as a statue of a Confederate general. Something that commits no action or provocation apart from that created in our own minds. It's an inanimate object. Even an idea spoken by another human being, which makes us feel enraged or inclined to respond, are harmless on their own. They're like inanimate objects. They commit no real transgressions by themselves. They simply are as they are until someone makes them more and runs with them by reacting to it. So by getting triggered and spreading this around, we're adding violent and angry energy to the world around us, where before there was none apart from our own feelings. So it's putting crap on top of more crap. Now, I'm not saying that there are not things in life that provoke rage in all of us rightly so, or that we might not have control over how we feel about it. But how we react to this can mean the difference between rising above or getting bogged down in the cycle of revolving evil. But I think it can be much better described by one of the more genius men in history, Carl Gustav Jung, who is the father of analytical psychology. He was criticized by the angry proponents of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the masterminds of the Holocaust, and he was being tried for war crimes. Now, some people accused Jung of having Nazi sympathies or something like that because he refused to condemn any fellow human being as being absolutely and irredeemably evil. So Alan Watts about Carl Jung had this to say also about him, said, "He would not condemn the things in others, and would therefore not be led into those thoughts, feelings, and acts of violence towards others which are always characteristic of the people who project the devil in themselves upon the outside, upon somebody else, upon a scapegoat." And that's really what we're talking about here. So Alan Watts felt it was necessary to bring up Carl Jung when asked about something similar to this, so I'm going to show you why. Listen to this.
Emotions are deeply and rightly aroused. And I would, for myself, say that were I in any situation where an Eichmann was operating,
Adolf Eichmann.
I would be roused to a degree of fury that I can hardly imagine in my present existence, but I know it would come out from me. I would oppose those sorts of villainies with all the energy that I have, and if I was trapped in such a situation, I would fight it to the end. But at the same time, I would recognize the relativity of my own emotional involvement.
I love that line.
I would know that I was fighting a man like Eichmann in the same way, shall we say, as a spider and a wasp, insects which naturally prey upon one another and fight one another, do so. But as a human being, I would not be able to regard my adversary as a metaphysical devil. That is to say, as one who represented the principle of absolute and unresolvable evil.
He said it greatly right there.
And I think this is the most important thing in Jung.
Talking about Carl Jung, as I mentioned.
That he was able to point out that to the degree that you condemn others and find evil in others, you are to that degree unconscious of the same thing in yourself.
Wow.
Or at least of the potentiality of it. There can be Eichmanns and Hitlers and Himmlers just because there are people who are unconscious of their own dark sides, and they project that darkness outward into, say, Jews or communists or whatever the enemy may be, and say, there is the darkness, it is not in me, and therefore because the darkness is not in me, I am justified in annihilating this enemy, whether it be with atom bombs or gas chambers or whatnot. But to the degree that a person becomes conscious that the evil is as much in himself as in the other, to this same degree he is not likely to project it onto some scapegoat and commit the most criminal acts of violence upon other people.
Wow. This may be true, but in order to make this philosophical point that I'm proposing to you guys today, that taking offense and being triggered is a form of violence on your loved ones and on fellow man in general, I don't even think we need to be that evolved. We can be totally unconscious of that and still recognize what it feels like to be injured or sick. That means bad to me. Anger makes me feel bad, like a pain. Inflicting pain on other people is violence. You'll reach a point where you realize that condemning another human being at all is probably counterproductive to your own personal growth. So I'm going to go ahead and read this passage, and then we'll get back to chat. I see some good stuff coming in. All right. So this is Carl Gustav Jung giving a lecture to some clergymen, Christian clergymen in Switzerland. And I believe he's trying to help them relate more with other people. Listen to this. People forget that even doctors have moral scruples. And by doctors, he's talking about shrinks and psychologists. And that a certain patient's confessions are hard even for a doctor to swallow. Yet the patient does not feel himself accepted unless the very worst in him is accepted too. No one can bring this about by mere words. It comes only through reflection and through the doctor's attitude towards himself and his own dark side. If the doctor wants to guide another, or even accompany him a step of the way, he must feel with that person's psyche. He never feels it when he passes judgment. Whether he puts his judgments into words or keeps them to himself makes not the slightest difference. Because it's an energy, perhaps, that it emits. To take the opposite position and to agree with the patient offhand is also of no use, but estranges him as much as condemnation. Feeling comes only through unprejudiced objectivity. This sounds almost like a scientific precept, and it could be confused with a purely intellectual, abstract attitude of mind, but what I mean here is something quite different. It's a human quality, a kind of deep respect for the facts, for the man who suffers from them, and for the riddle of such a man's life. The truly religious person has his attitude. He knows that God has brought all sorts of strange and inconceivable things to pass, and seeks in the most curious ways to enter a man's heart. He therefore senses in everything the unseen presence of the divine will. This is what I mean by unprejudiced objectivity. It is a moral achievement on the part of the doctor, who ought not to let himself be repelled by sickness and corruption. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Very powerful line there. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. I am the oppressor of the person that I condemn, not his friend and fellow sufferer. I do not in the least mean to say that we must never pass judgment when we desire to help and improve. But if the doctor wishes to help a human being, he must first be able to accept him as he is. And he can do this in reality only when he has already seen and accepted himself as he is. Perhaps this sounds very simple, but simple things are always the most difficult. In actual life, it requires the greatest art to be simple, and so acceptance of oneself in the essence of the moral problem and the acid test of one's whole outlook on life. That I feed the beggar, that I forgive an insult, that I love my enemy in the name of Christ, and these things are all undoubtedly great virtues. But what I do unto the least of my brethren, I do unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least amongst them all, the poorest of all beggars, the more impudent of all offenders, yea, the very fiend himself, that these are within me, and that I myself stand in need of the alms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy who must be loved? What then? Then, as a rule, the whole truth of Christianity is reversed, and there is then no more talk of love and long-suffering. We say to the brother within us, Raka, and condemn and rage against ourselves. We must hide him from the world. We deny ever having met this least among the lowly in ourselves. And had it been God himself who drew near to us in this despicable form, we should have denied him 1,000 times before a single cock had crowed. I think that that is profound. Now here is a scientist, a man who is not religious in any way that we normally would associate the term with somebody, and yet he puts that lecture in Christian terms so that these clergymen would understand. It can all be summed up in this paragraph. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. I am the oppressor of the person I condemn, not his friend and fellow sufferer. I mean, if I had that sort of tact, every time I got into a religious argument or a philosophy discussion with somebody, wow, what a genius. Carl Jung, everybody. Let's go back and look at chat and see what they've got to say about it. Ranger says, I think it's safe to bring in the doubt everything in here. Absolutely, brother. Don't stop thinking. Don't stop questioning yourself and others, your prejudices and all those things. If you just swim with the stream, you can't control what grows subconsciously in you. Always be aware that we are all capable of doing pretty bad stuff, and pretty good stuff too. I love you, Ranger. Well said. And that's where scapegoating leads to projecting, says Kawai. In German, the scapegoat is Sündenbock. English, sin goat. Interesting. Really, Gex? That's a coincidence, isn't it? Grease Monkey 78 says, well, there is a difference in being offended and having a calm, thoughtful response and lashing out verbally. That's kind of the point that I was really hoping to get your guys' take on. And I think that that's what Watts was trying to say, that there are things like the Holocaust, or if you were personally witnessing it, that would provoke all sorts of, triggered or raged emotions. And his point was that, yes, there are things that will enrage us, and rightly so, but it is the propagation of that rage that I don't think helps anyone. And if you intend to inflame other people with those same emotions, I think that that is where the violence comes in. Emotional violence. So yes, a Side Yard Vagrant asks, is it violence? No, I believe in your attempt to make others feel that same way. If you're if you're joking and insulting other people, if your intent were to make them feel mad too and enraged, then yes, that would be violent. Or to the degree with which you spread those jokes around, right? If you're joking, with your friends, and I think that that's a really good question. That's people have asked that a lot. Is like joking towards somebody knowing that it will hurt them. Is that there? I think if you intentionally tried to promote it to those who would be injured by it, then probably. I think that's a great question. Sure, June says, yeah, people tend to overreact to many little things when they are triggered. At least it seems that way through social media. No one knows how they are in IRL. Well put. I could write a really angry and enraged text while laughing my ass off. Well said, man. Ranger says, well, of course being offended can be offensive. If you, for example, have an idea and someone is offended by it, they are, in an emotional way, criticizing your idea in a way that can't really express what is wrong with your idea and just show it through anger, which often causes anger on the other side too. Absolutely, like we were talking about last week, Ranger with mob mentality. Hooker says, like a plant, what you water will grow. By focusing on others' evil, you are attracting it outside of time and space. Human evil belongs to all humans. If you feed it, it will grow within you and others around you. Well said. Hennifer says, on the other hand, you have to admit that it depends on your education level, too, and how much you let others get your dark side on the outside. I'm sorry, I don't know how to explain it better in English. I think I know where you're coming from. Shiro says, I would not lie that to education and like knowing maths and stuff, more like being socially intelligent. I mean, you don't have to be a math mastermind to be able to write, to know how people feel and why. I agree, there is an intuitive amount of knowledge there. Range says, if you use negativity, you will get a negative response. And Ode says, I thought anger was just a wrong outcome from some form of sadness. True, there are philosophers that say that anger, all negative emotions actually come from fear being the original thought, but that's another topic. So yes, if according to you guys, I don't see any serious disagreement in chat that I'm not mistaken in the fact that getting triggered over shit, really regardless of what it is actually a form of violence on the rest of the world and your loved ones. And the people that are exposed to it. Because anger and just violent, weird thought like that makes me feel sick. I equate feeling sick with pain. And if pain is being inflicted on me, I think that is a form of violence. And I do not mean to say that it is anyone's fault but my own if something that makes me feel that way is an inanimate object, like a statue of a Confederate general. Or something somebody says that's silly. Barring anything other than the most extreme, like war crimes or human rights atrocities, anything shy of that, I'm choosing to look at my being offended by things as my own problem and to be dealt with on my own in private, so as not to commit violence against my fellow man. So, a Side Yard Vagrant says, violence sounds like it has intent behind it. As being well, I would go so far as to say that intent is there. When somebody sends out an angry tweet, their intent is actually to enrage others. Or, for example, the bumper sticker that started this whole thought chain. The bumper sticker I saw in California said, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Well, I'm going to come up with my own bumper sticker that says, if you're outraged, shut up and go meditate or have a few cocktails. Then take action if it still seems necessary or even useful. That's going to be, if I could fit all that onto a bumper sticker, I would.